Hi, this is Sean D'Souza, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation Podcast. This podcast isn't some magic trick about how to work less. Instead, it's about how to really enjoy the work that you do and to enjoy your vacation time. Hi, it's Sean, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation. Let me ask you a question. If I asked you, what is the uniqueness of this podcast? Yes, this podcast, the 3-Month Vacation. It would be pretty hard to tell, wouldn't it? So why is it so hard to tell? Let me ask you a second question. What if I were to ask you, what is the uniqueness of the article writing course? There's a good chance that you would answer, it's the toughest writing course in the world. It's baby tough. It's not dog tough or cat tough, but as difficult as dealing with a baby. So what is the difference between the two? Why is it that you can remember one of them, but the other one seems really odd? You can't even figure out what the uniqueness of this podcast could be. And the reason is not as complicated as you think it is. One of the main reasons why people don't remember your uniqueness is because you don't say it over and over and over again. And if you've noticed, we've never really mentioned the uniqueness of this podcast, and that's why you don't know it. This is the first of 6 reruns as we enter our summer zone and we take a break. And this podcast talks about not just getting your uniqueness out there, but how to effectively test that uniqueness. Once you have it out there, how to effectively test it. And that's what we did with this podcast as well, and something that we'll cover in 2019. But let's get started with how to effectively test your uniqueness. You're listening to part 2 of Uniqueness, how to find that uniqueness and how to push it forward in a way that customers pay attention to you. This is the 2-part episode, and in the last episode we covered how you can go about finding the uniqueness for your business, your product, or your service. And the second thing we covered was the reasoning behind why different products and services need their own uniqueness. In this episode, we look at what you're going to do, how you're going to test your uniqueness. Once you've settled on your uniqueness, how are you going to test it? What is likely to happen to a woman's bikini when she's surfing? If you're a woman, surfing with a bikini was slightly out of the question. You'd be in the waves, walk out of the water, and you've literally lost your bottoms, said business owner Anna Jerstrom. So Jerstrom decided to create sexy, bright bikinis. And the uniqueness? Bikinis that stay on no matter how rough the surf. And with this single-minded pursuit, investment banker Anna Jerstrom started a business called Calavera. But wouldn't she need to test the uniqueness before she began? In almost every case, testing a uniqueness is completely unnecessary. One of the biggest reasons why you shouldn't be bothered with testing a uniqueness is because you're unlikely to have any competition. Let's take the uniqueness of Calavera, for example. Why did Jerstrom start the company? Surely she should have been able to find some bikinis that didn't slide off in the surf. Even with the power of the internet at her disposal, she was still running into dead ends. It means that there will be hundreds, if not thousands, of customers who are also finding it hard to get a decent product. That line of thought may not sound reasonable to you, but let's look at the alternative, shall we? Let's say you decide to sell a product. Maybe it's an information product that's based on presentations. When you look at Amazon.com, you're likely to find at least 5,000 books and presentations. Do you really want to go through every sales page trying to find out what is unique about each of those presentation products? Clients have a similar mindset. They don't care about doing such extensive research either. They just want to show up to your business, whether online or offline, and they want you to explicitly tell them why you're different from the competition. Whether you have a product, a training, or a service, your uniqueness doesn't need testing simply because it's impossible to test. But there's another good reason why you shouldn't bother to test. The biggest reason why you should just go ahead and run your uniqueness is because the competition is lazy or confused or both. Most companies are clearly at sea when asked what makes them unique. If you have a uniqueness factor in place, that puts you way ahead of your competitors. However, there's also another reason why you can go ahead quite happily. But even if your competition has a uniqueness, it's not of much use unless they employ it on a very frequent basis. A uniqueness itself is not enough for clients to remember what is being said. Volvo, the car company, is known for their safe cars because they ran endless ads about safety. Domino's made $1 billion selling pizza because of their 30 minutes or it's free slogan. They pushed out that message over and over and over again. And yet think for a second about your competitors right now. Can you quickly bring up their uniqueness? It's not enough to have a uniqueness. You have to do so much more. In fact, you have to take these 3 steps to make sure the uniqueness does its job properly. Step 1, you have to consistently get the word out. Step 2, you have to state the position of the competition. And step 3, you have to state your own position. Let's go through the steps one by one. Step 1, getting the word out. What does getting the word out mean? It means that a uniqueness can't just sit around. It has to be repeated in some form or the other over and over and over again. If you've listened to the 3-month vacation podcast, for example, when I talk about 5000 BC, I will repeat the same thing over and over again. I will say 5000 BC is a place where introverts meet because they feel safe. The same message will be sent out in articles, in books, in just about every medium possible. And the message never changes much. Keeping that message consistent is what's critical. If you keep changing the message simply because you're bored of it, you've lost more than half of the uniqueness battle. You want to make sure that the uniqueness is as simple as possible and then continue to mention it everywhere. When you consider that you may have more than one product or service, you have to pick your battles. For instance, the uniqueness of psychotactics is tiny increments. But often the overall company uniqueness is of little value to the client. And that's because they are more focused on the product or the service that they're buying at that moment. So yes, it's fine to have a company uniqueness, but the most important thing that you have to figure out is that at this very moment the client is buying a specific product, a specific service. And not only that, but you also have to have the medium where you're going to promote this uniqueness. So let's take the 3-month vacation podcast, for example. You will notice that I will consistently end with the uniqueness of 5000 BC, which is the membership site. However, while I'm explaining something in the podcast or in an article, I will be sure to talk about the uniqueness of, say, psychotactics courses and how they're not just information but about skill. See, I did it again. You don't want to bring up the uniqueness of every single product or service. You want to make sure you have a few entry points. For us at Psychotactics, the entry points that need to be stressed are the brain audit, 5000 BC, and the courses. It's not like the rest of the products and services don't matter. They do. But the uniqueness of those products or services are on the sales page or on the sales pitch itself. If it wasn't clear, what I'm saying is that you have to have doorways. You have to have 2 or 3 products that you're consistently harping upon. These are the doorways the clients enter through. And then they find the other products, the other services, the other training. So having these doorways is very critical. As I mentioned earlier, 5000 BC, the brain audit, they are the main doorways, and then clients come to buy other stuff. So trying to harp on every single product uniqueness is completely useless. You could have a dozen uniquenesses for a dozen products. But that doesn't mean you should be beating that drum for every single one of those products. Pick 1 or 2 or even 3 of your services or products and then keep driving them home consistently. Keep hammering them home in pre-selected areas of your marketing. But that is only the first part of making sure your uniqueness is heard. To guarantee that you get the point across, you have to state the position of your competition. So how do you go about stating the position of your competition? Ever notice how shiny Harley-Davidson bikes tend to be? The reason for their shiny nature is probably the diligence of the bike owner, but equally, it's how the bike has been positioned in the Harley owner's mind. Harley owners have been known to truck their bikes across the country and then ride them locally. After all, the bikes have to be in a pristine condition at all times. The BMW bike owners, on the other hand, seem to favor the dust and the dirt. They push their bikes across all sorts of punishing conditions. Even if the above description of BMW versus Harley is not 100% correct, it demonstrates the difference. And uniqueness is a point of difference. To make sure you get the point of difference across, you need to have the competition clearly in your sights. Now, if you have $1 million promotion budget, you can continue to mention your slogan, but if you're a small business, you tend to get very few chances, which is why it's important to bring the competition in when you're describing your own point of uniqueness. So first, you have to pick your enemy. The enemy may not be a company. It could be a way of doing things. So here's the way I position the enemy. I say, other courses give you a money-back guarantee, but don't give you a guarantee of skill. Notice there are no names. I'm not taking on anyone in particular. I'm simply taking on an aspect of online courses. So let's say you ran a yoga class and you wanted to position the enemy. And you said, other yoga classes have a lot of yoga routines, but they don't necessarily pay attention to what can injure you long after you've left the yoga class. Now you're defining the enemy. Now you're defining that competition. Let's take a third example. Let's talk about microphones. Let's say you're selling a product like microphones. You say, other microphones pick up unwanted noise and reflections, especially in a bad-sounding, untreated room. And in a flash, you've got the client to understand what's the difference between you and the other people, even though you haven't said anything about your own business. You have positioned the enemy. And once you've defined the enemy's characteristics, you know what you're battling against. No doubt the enemy will have many flaws, but it's your job to pick one. Uniqueness is about one thing. And the moment you pick the opponent's flaw, you can easily position yourself against them. Which takes us to the third step, doesn't it? In step 1, we looked at how you needed to get the word out. In step 2, you looked at how you need to position the enemy. And now you have to state your own position. That's step 3. So how do you state your own position? Your position is the exact opposite of the flaw that you've picked. If that is the competition, work too slowly, then you work quickly. If they give you 200 pages of information, then you give only the 10 or 15 pages needed. If they sell ripe bananas, you sell them green, and so that they don't ripen too quickly. When we referred to the Calavera bikinis earlier, Anna Jerstrom, who was the owner, her enemy was the terribly fitting bikinis. And her position was bikinis that stay on no matter how rough the surf. Now, you can do this very easily. You can pick up anything off your desk and ask yourself why you use that particular product. And what you'll find is that you are very clear about some of these facts, which is, what is the enemy's position? So why am I using this sharpener? What is the enemy's position? Why am I using this sharpener? Why am I using this microphone instead of some other microphone? Why am I wearing these shoes instead of those shoes? And what you have is a very clear definition of the enemy and your own position. So it's not enough to just state it. You have to have these other things as well, which is state the enemy's position, state your position. And this doesn't just apply to products. It applies to services or presentations as well. So for instance, when I give a presentation, I want to stand out from the rest of the presenters. So I talk about how businesses make $1 gazillion, but we make more than enough. And we take 3 months off every year. Not working while we're away, not checking email, but completely free on vacation, doing absolutely nothing. When you state the competitor's position and you contrast it with your own, you see the lights going off in the prospect's brain. They can see the difference because they have that contrast, they have that comparison. And this brings us to the testing bit again. How do you know if your uniqueness is truly unique? You can see it. You can see the nodding of the customer's head. When you state your uniqueness, the clients tend to see the difference. They see the difference between your competitor and you get this smile, this slight nod of the head. You know that you've struck a chord with the client. Oh, and there is the echo. When you ask the client what you do, they should be able to echo your words perfectly. Listen for that echo. Are they missing out important bits? If they are, your uniqueness may not be as simple as you think. You'll need to edit it quite a bit. If they are totally off tangent, then you haven't made your point as precise as possible. If you run into your client a month or 6 months from now, and they can echo your uniqueness perfectly, then you've got a uniqueness that has resonated with them, and it's truly a point of difference. Finally, a lot of uniqueness comes about when you're not expecting it. That line about how our courses are different from every other online course, that wasn't something I figured out while sitting down and going through this exercise of uniqueness. I probably said it in response to a question, or maybe on some interview when I was trying to explain what makes our courses at Psychotactics so different. And this is how it is. A lot of your uniqueness is going to pop up when you least expect it. So make sure that you write it down when you hear yourself saying something interesting about your product or your service. Nonetheless, as a starting point, defining the enemy is a very crucial exercise. It's only when you define the enemy that you can clarify your own position in a memorable manner. To get your uniqueness really charging down the road, you need to consider all 3 points. Step 1, you have to consistently get the word out. Step 2, you have to state the position of your competition. And step 3, you have to state your own position. And that's how uniqueness fits, just like a Calavera bikini. Oh, one more thing. Calavera closed down its business in 2017. They decided they wanted to do something different after a good 5 years of running the business, and so they decided to shut shop. So this brings us to the end of this podcast. We had it in 2 parts. If you didn't listen to the first part, go and listen. If you did listen to the first part, listen to it again. Uniqueness is so critical. And so few businesses seem to have it, and they always struggle. They always say, we're not getting the best price possible. Well, why would I pay you more if I don't know what's unique about you? So go out there, listen to the first part, listen to the second part, listen to the first part, well, you know what you have to do. So let's summarize what we've covered so far in both of the episodes. The first thing that we looked at was, how do you find your uniqueness for your business or your product or service? We looked at the grasses that the wildebeest graze on, and that was because of Aldonio Lengai, the mountain of God. And most businesses don't have this mountain of God, this uniqueness that's inbuilt into their system, so they have to create their uniqueness. And this is where the problem begins, because when you ask clients, what is my uniqueness, or you sit down and make a list, what you get are a whole bunch of things, and you have to pick one thing. And you go, how am I going to pick one thing? Well, be like David Attenborough. Just drop to the forest floor, pick that uniqueness, and then expand on that uniqueness, drive that uniqueness home. It's a great starting point. You might not think it's a great starting point, but right now you have no other starting point, so might as well have a slightly better than average starting point. Pick something and then explain it. And that's how you start off. When we started 5000 BC, I didn't have a uniqueness. We didn't have a uniqueness for many years. I didn't even know that there were so many introverts hanging around until we started having workshops, and we looked, and everyone in the room was an introvert, except me. Well, almost everyone except me. And then in 5000 BC was the same thing. Now, 5000 BC was always a safe place. It was always be kind, be helpful, or be gone. That was always the motto. But this whole bit about introverts and introverts finding it safe, that was what came later. And that's what goes in the podcast consistently. When you look at 5000 BC, you'll find there are a whole bunch of points. And these go in bullet points, but they don't become your uniqueness. From those bullet points, pick one of them and make sure that stands out. And that's how you go about creating that uniqueness. Pick something, pick one thing. This takes us to the second point, which is, does every product and every service need to have a uniqueness? And the answer is yes. It's just like a family. Everyone in the family has the same last name. That's everyone belongs to the same company, but they all have different uniquenesses. And this is true not just for every product or service, but every version of your product. So Photoshop 1 has to be different from Photoshop 2, which has to be different from Photoshop 3. Otherwise, it's impossible to sell the product. You can't just say, hey, this is Photoshop. We've had to do this for the brain audit. We've had version 1, version 2, version 3.2. If and when we have version 4, it has to be different from version 3.2. Otherwise, why bother buying it? So it's not just the products or the different products that need a uniqueness factor, but also versions of the product. So if you've got a course that's changing all the time, like for instance, the article writing course now is version 2.0, that uniqueness is different from the first one, which incidentally wasn't very clear. But now we say, well, you can learn how to write an article in 90 minutes or less. And this is a magazine quality article. That's a clear uniqueness. And it exists for version 2 of the article writing course. So you have to be very clear about it every time you put out a new version or for different products on your website. And finally, when you have a uniqueness, is it important to test it? You can't test it. That's the whole reality of things. You can't go around testing 50 or 60 or 5,000 books that exist on Amazon. You can't go around testing all the services and all the products and all the workshops. It's impossible to know exactly what makes them unique. And one of the biggest problems with uniquenesses is that most people are too lazy or too silly about their uniqueness. So you never get to know what their uniqueness is anyway. I mean, check it. Just look at the stuff that you're dealing with, your competition. It's not very clear what makes them unique. So how do you go about creating that uniqueness? Well, there are those three things. The first thing is you have to consistently get the word out. Notice how I get it out over and over again in the podcast, in the books, over and over and over again. The second is that you have to state the position of the enemy. And the third is you have to state your own position. All of these three things have to exist if you are to get your uniqueness across. And that brings us to the end of this 3-month vacation podcast. So what's happening in psychotactics land? Not a lot is happening right now, but as we roll into January, we do have the info products course that's coming up. That's on the 25th of Jan. And it's a home study. You have to be on the waiting list to get your home study. We only have 35 copies and then we're done. You can, however, get an enormous amount of goodies. So that's at psychotactics.com/info goodies. So go and get your goodies. And as you wind down for the year, think of how you can get information out, because that's one of the three prongs of a business. When you look at a business, you have consulting, you have training, and you have leverage. And what leverage does most of all is it builds up time. Time becomes our biggest resource ever. And if we don't have the time, well, then we're always in that loop. So the info products, that's what got us out of that loop. When we wrote the brain audit, when we created other products, that's what got us out of always being in consulting, always being in training. So try it out, psychotactics.com/info goodies, and enjoy yourself. The other thing you want to do is you want to start afresh in the next year. And 5000 BC is a really good place. And the reason why 5000 BC is so unique is because it consists of introverts. And all of us, there's no grandstanding, there is no, hey, look at me. Rather, it is one of be kind, be helpful, or be gone. Now, there are lots of series on consulting, on so many things, doing a workshop, things that you would go, oh, I have to buy that book, I have to buy that book. All of that stuff, or a lot of that stuff, is there in 5000 BC. And the good thing is that if something is missing, you can ask for it. You're not going to get that in a book. You're not going to get that from any course that you join online. That's what you get in 5000 BC. So consider 5000 BC. There's also a little waiting there, 21 days. So the sooner you get to it, the better. So that's 5000bc.com. And the other one was psychotactics.com/info goodies. And that's me, Sean D'Souza, saying bye for now. And I hope you have a really good holiday season. Still listening? It's the Christmas week, and most of New Zealand goes on vacation. And this includes all the cafes. They just close. Some of them close for a month, and some of them will close for at least a week. And this includes the guys that roast the coffee and grind the coffee. So we are on a coffee hunt, and we know one place, and that's Dizengoff. They're open every single day of the year except Christmas. So yeah, we'll have to skip the coffee on Christmas. But other than that, we found one place where we can get coffee every day. I know it sounds pretty addictive, but I hope you enjoy your tea, coffee, whatever it is that you like drinking, maybe hot water with lemon. That's me, Sean D'Souza, saying bye for now. See you in 5000 BC. Bye-bye.